What's the point of building an empire if you lose your soul in the process? Marcus Hale spent 23 years convincing himself that success was worth any sacrifice. Tonight, he's about to discover the true cost of that choice, and it's lying unconscious on a hospital gurney, fighting for every breath. It started as just another Tuesday, another board meeting, another hospital wing with his name on it. Marcus walked through St. Catherine's Hospital like he owned the place, because he did. His donations built the trauma center. His money opened every door. But money can't prepare you for the moment your past walks back into your life. When Marcus cut through the emergency ward, he saw a young man covered in blood, surrounded by panicked doctors. He wasn't expecting his heart to stop at that face. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair matted with blood, features that looked hauntingly familiar. Get him the best you have. Now. I don't care what it costs. The medical team exchanged confused glances. Why would a billionaire care so much about an unidentified accident victim? But he wasn't a stranger. When the nurse brought Marcus the patient's belongings, his world shattered. Inside a silver locket was a photograph he thought he'd never see again. A woman he once loved. A baby he walked away from. Engraved on the back, Ethan Hale, April 15th. The dying boy wasn't a stranger. He was the son Marcus abandoned 23 years ago. The child he left behind to chase his dreams. If you're invested in tales of redemption and second chances, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like and comment. Do you believe some mistakes are too big to forgive? Now, let me tell you how Marcus Hale discovered that saving his son's life might be the only thing that could save them both. Marcus Hale woke every morning at 5:47 a.m. in a penthouse that touched the clouds. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city below like a kingdom he'd conquered one algorithm at a time. His espresso machine was Italian, worth more than most people's cars. His suits were bespoke, his watch Swiss, his view unobstructed by anything as common as humanity. He built Titan Tech from nothing, a garage startup that became an empire worth $43 billion. His face graced magazine covers with headlines like "The Man Who Rewired Silicon Valley" and "Marcus Hale, Ruthless Genius or Visionary Prophet?" He preferred the former. Ruthless got things done. Visionary was for people who still believed in fairy tales. At 55, Marcus had everything a man could want. Power that made senators return his calls. Wealth that made problems disappear with a phone call. Control over an empire that stretched across continents. He worked 16-hour days, attended galas where champagne flowed like water, and slept alone in a bed big enough for four. The silence never bothered him. That's what he told himself every night when the city lights flickered below and the penthouse felt less like a palace and more like a tomb. Sometimes, in the space between exhaustion and sleep, memories would slip through the walls he'd built. A woman's laugh, bright and unguarded. A baby's cry cutting through the night. Sarah's voice, thick with tears, asking him one last time to stay. "You're choosing a startup over your son? I'm choosing our future. Once I get this company off the ground, we'll have everything." "We already have everything, Marcus. We have each other." But Marcus had walked out anyway, briefcase in hand, conviction in his heart. He'd convinced himself that success would vindicate that choice. That one day, Sarah would understand. That one day, his son would thank him. 23 years later, Marcus didn't even know if his son was alive. He'd signed the divorce papers without reading them, agreed to Sarah's terms without negotiation. Clean break. No contact. She'd made it clear she wanted nothing from him. Not his money, not his name, not his presence in their child's life. And Marcus, buried in product launches and investor meetings, had let them vanish like smoke. Some nights, when the penthouse felt especially empty, he'd pull up old photos on his phone. Sarah, young and radiant, holding a baby with dark hair and curious eyes. Ethan, that was his name. Ethan Hale. Born April 15th, 23 years ago. Marcus would stare at that photo for exactly 60 seconds, then delete it. Again. Because he'd memorized every pixel, every shadow, every curve of his son's infant face. And every morning, he'd download it again from the cloud storage he pretended he didn't maintain. He told himself it was nostalgia, sentiment, a biological quirk that evolution hadn't bred out of successful men. He never called it regret. Tonight, Marcus stood in his penthouse, preparing for another hospital board meeting, another evening of philanthropic theater where he'd smile and shake hands and write checks that meant nothing. His reflection in the window showed a man who'd won every battle that mattered. But the face looking back at him was hollow, victorious, and utterly alone. The lobby of St. Catherine's Hospital gleamed with the kind of sterile perfection that money bought. Marble floors reflected the crystal chandeliers Marcus had donated 3 years ago. The Hale wing stretched to his left, the Hale Research Center to his right. His name was everywhere, carved in stone and etched in brass, a monument to generosity that required nothing of him except a signature on a check. Marcus checked his Patek Philippe. 7:43 p.m. The board meeting started at 8. He had 17 minutes to cross the lobby, take the elevator to the executive floor, and slip into his mask of benevolent billionaire. 17 minutes to become the version of himself that people expected. But his assistant had texted him the wrong entrance code. Instead of the executive elevator, Marcus found himself cutting through the service corridor, past supply closets and administrative offices, taking a shortcut that hospital donors weren't supposed to see. That's when he heard the chaos. Shouting, the frantic beeping of machines, the controlled panic that only came when death was standing in the room, waiting. Marcus should have kept walking, should have found his meeting, should have let the medical professionals handle whatever crisis was unfolding behind those swinging doors. But something pulled him forward, something primal and inexplicable, like a fishhook lodged beneath his ribs, yanking him toward the emergency ward. He pushed through the doors and froze. The scene exploded around him in fragmented images. Blood-soaked gurney, frantic nurses, a young man's body, broken and still, surrounded by a medical team fighting to keep him alive. The sharp smell of antiseptic mixed with something copper and terrifying. But it was the face that stopped Marcus's heart. Dark hair matted with blood, sharp cheekbones that could have been carved from marble. A jawline Marcus had seen somewhere before, in some half-forgotten dream or photograph. The boy couldn't have been more than 23, 24. Young. Too young to be dying on a Tuesday night in a hospital corridor. Marcus's hands started shaking. His breath caught in his throat. Every logical part of his brain screamed at him to leave, to let the professionals work, to go to his meeting and forget he'd ever seen this boy's face. But he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't look away. "Sir, you can't be here." A nurse tried to guide him back, but Marcus brushed past her like she was smoke. What happened to him? His voice came out raw, unfamiliar. Car accident. Multiple trauma. "Sir, you really need to." "Who's his surgeon?" "We're still trying to stabilize." "Not good enough." Marcus pulled out his phone, hands still trembling. "Get me Dr. Patricia Chun. Now. I don't care if she's off duty. I don't care if she's on vacation. Get her here in the next 10 minutes, or you're all looking for new jobs." The medical team stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. Because Marcus didn't know this boy. Didn't know why looking at his face felt like staring into a mirror from 23 years ago. Didn't know why every instinct he'd spent decades burying was suddenly screaming at him that if this stranger died tonight, something fundamental inside Marcus would die with him. "Sir, who are you?" "Marcus Hale. And that boy gets the best care this hospital can provide. Do you understand me?" The nurse's eyes widened in recognition. The name on the building. The man who could make careers or destroy them with a phone call. "Yes, Mr. Hale. Of course." Marcus stood there, watching them work, unable to tear his eyes away from the unconscious young man whose face looked like a ghost from a life he'd tried to forget. He didn't know yet. Didn't know the truth that would shatter his carefully constructed world. But some part of him, some buried, screaming part, already suspected. 47879. Dr. Patricia Chun arrived in 12 minutes. still wearing her dinner dress under her white coat. She didn't ask questions. When Marcus Hale called, you came. That was the unspoken rule of St. Catherine's Hospital, where his donations paid for the equipment that kept people alive. Talk to me, she said, already moving toward the trauma bay. Marcus followed, ignoring the protests of nurses who tried to keep him in the waiting area. He stayed close enough to hear every word, close enough to see the blood-soaked gauze and the monitors that beeped with terrifying irregularity. Male, early 20s, multiple blunt force trauma, collapsed lung, internal bleeding, possible spinal involvement. BP is crashing. We need to get him to or now. Dr. Chin's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking pupils, examining wounds, firing orders that sent the medical team into coordinated chaos. Marcus watched it all through a fog of inexplicable terror, his hands gripping the doorframe so hard his knuckles turned white. Will he live? The question came out broken. Dr. Chin glanced at him, her expression carefully neutral. We'll do everything we can, Marcus. But I need you to let us work. I'm not leaving. Marcus. I said I'm not leaving. Something in his voice made her pause. In 15 years of friendship, she'd never seen Marcus Hale look afraid. Angry, yes. Determined, always. But fear? That was new. That was wrong. Fine. But stay out of the way. They rushed the boy to surgery. Marcus followed as far as they'd let him, then stood outside the operating room doors like a sentinel, unwilling or unable to move. His phone buzzed repeatedly. The board meeting, his assistant, investors who needed decisions. He ignored them all. Hours crawled past. Other hospital staff walked by, doing double takes when they recognized him. Marcus Hale, standing in a surgical corridor like a common visitor, still wearing his $1,000 suit now wrinkled with sweat and stress. A young resident approached carefully. Mr. Hale? Sir, we still don't have an ID on the patient. No wallet, no phone that survived the crash. Do you know him? No. The word tasted like a lie. Then why? The resident caught himself, realizing the question was too personal, too bold. Why am I here? Marcus finished for him. His laugh was hollow, brittle. I don't know. But that wasn't entirely true. Because every time he closed his eyes, he saw that face. Those cheekbones. That jawline. Features that haunted him in ways he couldn't explain, couldn't rationalize, couldn't escape. Dr. Chun emerged 6 hours later, exhausted, her scrubs stained with the evidence of her battle. Marcus stood immediately, his heart hammering against his ribs. He's alive, she said, and Marcus nearly collapsed with relief. Barely. We've stabilized him, but Marcus. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. The next 48 hours are critical. His injuries are severe. Brain swelling, internal damage, multiple fractures. Even if he survives, we don't know what kind of recovery he's looking at. But he's alive. For now. Marcus nodded, processing information his mind couldn't quite hold. I want round-the-clock care. Private room. The best equipment you have. Marcus, we don't even know who he is. We can't authorize. Bill me. Whatever it costs. I don't care. He met her eyes, his voice dropping to something raw and desperate. Please, Patricia. Just keep him alive. Dr. Chin studied him for a long moment, seeing something in her old friend's face that she'd never seen before. Okay, she said softly. Okay. Marcus stayed. All night. Into the next morning. Sitting in a chair outside the ICU room where a stranger lay fighting for his life, while Marcus fought with questions he couldn't answer and a terror he couldn't name. Why did this boy matter? Why couldn't Marcus walk away? The answer was coming. In a worn locket. In a name engraved on silver. But for now, Marcus just sat and waited and prayed to a God he'd stopped believing in decades ago. The nurse appeared like a ghost in the fluorescent hospital light, holding a clear plastic bag that rattled softly as she walked. Marcus had been sitting for hours in the same position, his expensive suit wrinkled beyond redemption, his hands clasped so tightly his fingers had gone numb. Mr. Hale? Her voice was gentle, cautious. We've cataloged the patient's belongings. Since you're covering his care, I thought you might want to hold on to them until we can identify next of kin. Next of kin. The words hung in the sterile air like a prayer Marcus didn't know how to say. He took the bag without speaking. Inside, the debris of a life. A wallet so worn the leather had split at the corners, a jacket with a torn sleeve still dark with blood, a set of keys attached to a faded keychain. And something else. Something that caught the light and made Marcus's breath stop in his throat. A silver locket. His hands shook as he reached into the bag. The locket was tarnished, the chain broken, but when Marcus lifted it, the weight felt familiar. Impossibly, terrifyingly familiar. He shouldn't open it. Every instinct screamed at him to put it back, to walk away, to return to his penthouse and pretend this night had never happened. But his fingers were already moving, working the clasp with a precision that felt like muscle memory. The locket opened with a soft click that sounded like a door closing on his old life. The photograph inside was faded, creased at the corners. But Marcus would have recognized that face in the dark, in his dreams, in hell itself. Sarah, young, radiant, laughing at something beyond the camera's frame. Her hair caught mid-motion, her eyes bright with a joy Marcus had forgotten existed. She was holding a baby, maybe 6 months old, with dark hair and curious eyes that stared directly at the lens. The world tilted. Marcus gripped the locket so hard the edges cut into his palm. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But his hands were already turning the locket over, already finding the engraving on the back. Words etched in silver, worn smooth by years of someone's fingers tracing them over and over. Ethan Hale, born April 15th. The locket slipped from Marcus's fingers and hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. The nurse jumped, startled, but Marcus couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except stare at that small piece of silver lying on the hospital tile. 23 years ago, he'd walked away from a woman and a baby. 23 years ago, he'd convinced himself it was the right choice. And now that baby was lying in surgery, fighting for his life, while Marcus sat in a corridor realizing he'd just spent 6 hours watching his own son die. The boy on the gurney wasn't a stranger. He was Ethan, his son, the child he'd abandoned, the family he'd destroyed, the past he'd tried to bury under success and money and carefully constructed lies. Marcus doubled over in his chair, a sound tearing from his throat that wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a scream. The nurse reached for him, alarmed, but he waved her away with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. All this time, all these years, his son had been out there, living, breathing, carrying a locket with his mother's face and his father's name. And Marcus hadn't even known he existed. Marcus didn't remember falling to his knees. Didn't remember the nurse calling for help or Dr. Chun rushing back down the corridor. He only remembered the locket on the floor, face up, Sarah's smile staring at him like an accusation. The baby in that photograph was fighting for his life 3 doors down. The baby he'd held exactly twice before deciding a startup was worth more than fatherhood. The baby whose first steps he'd never seen, whose first words he'd never heard, whose entire existence he'd signed away with divorce papers and a wire transfer he couldn't even remember the amount of. Marcus. Patricia's hands were on his shoulders, trying to pull him up, but his legs wouldn't work. Marcus, what's wrong? Talk to me. He couldn't. Words required air, and his lungs had forgotten how to function. All he could do was point at the locket, at the photograph, at the evidence of his greatest sin lying on the hospital floor like discarded trash. Patricia picked it up. Her sharp intake of breath told him she understood. Oh my God. Marcus, is this my son? The words came out broken, shattered. That's my son in there. Ethan. His name is Ethan. The memories came in waves, drowning him. Sarah, 8 months pregnant, glowing despite her exhaustion. We're going to be a family, Marcus. Isn't that exciting? Him, hunched over his laptop, barely looking up. Yeah, exciting. The night Ethan was born, holding that tiny, screaming bundle, feeling nothing but terror and resentment that this infant was going to derail everything he'd been building. Sarah's face, radiant with love he couldn't understand. Our son, Marcus. Our perfect son. 6 weeks later. The fight that ended everything. Sarah's voice hoarse from crying. You haven't held him in 3 days. You sleep at the office. You look at him like he's an inconvenience. I'm building our future, Sarah. You're destroying our present. Once the funding comes through. I don't care about the funding. She was sobbing now, holding Ethan against her chest while the baby wailed. I care about having a husband. About our son having a father. About you being here, Marcus. Just being here. But he grabbed his briefcase. Walked out. Told himself it was temporary. That he'd fix things once the company stabilized. Once he proved to everyone. To her. To himself. That he wasn't just another failed dreamer. The divorce papers came 4 months later. He'd signed them in his new office, surrounded by venture capitalists who told him he'd made the right choice. Family is important, one had said, but legacy is forever. Marcus had built his legacy. $43 billion. His name on buildings. His face on magazine covers. Power that made presidents listen. And while he was building that empire, his son was out there, growing up without a father, learning to walk, to talk, to exist in a world where Marcus Hale was a ghost, a name, a check that never came because Sarah had too much pride to ask. How many birthdays had he missed? How many scraped knees and bad dreams and first days of school? How many times had Ethan asked about him? How many times had Sarah had to explain why his father chose money over him? 23 years of his son's life. Gone. Traded for stock options and board seats and a penthouse that felt like a mausoleum. And now Ethan was dying. Possibly already dead while Marcus sat here, drowning in regret. All his billions couldn't buy back time. Couldn't erase his choices. Couldn't make him anything other than what he was. A man who'd won everything and lost the only thing that mattered. Marcus didn't sleep. Couldn't. While Ethan lay unconscious in the ICU, Marcus sat in his penthouse with his laptop open, searching for ghosts. It took him 40 minutes to find Sarah's obituary. 2 years old. Published in a small community newspaper he would have never read. The photograph showed an older version of the woman he'd loved. Laugh lines around her eyes. Silver threading through her dark hair, but still beautiful. Still recognizably her. Sarah Mitchell, 51. Passed away peacefully after a courageous battle with ovarian cancer. She is survived by her son, Ethan. Peacefully. Marcus wanted to put his fist through the screen. There was nothing peaceful about dying at 51. Nothing peaceful about leaving your son alone in the world. He kept digging. Found her Facebook page, left dormant since her death. The posts were sporadic, mostly photographs. Ethan as a toddler, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. Ethan in a Little League uniform, bat slung over his shoulder. Ethan at high school graduation, cap and gown, Sarah's arm around him, both of them beaming. Marcus enlarged every photo, studying his son's face as it aged, looking for himself in those features. The sharp cheekbones, those were Sarah's. But the set of the jaw? The intensity in those dark eyes. That was pure Hale. He found Ethan's social media next. The account hadn't been updated in months, but the history was there. Posts about classes at community college. Late-night study sessions. Part-time job at a bookstore. Everything normal, mundane, alive. Then 2 years ago, everything changed. Mom's sick. Really sick. Please keep her in your thoughts. 3 months later, she's gone. I don't know how to do this without her. After that, the posts grew sparse, desperate. Anyone know of apartments under $800? Flexible on location. Then, looking for weekend work. Reliable, hard worker, references available. Marcus found the debt next. Student loans Ethan had taken out to pay for his mother's treatment. Medical bills that had piled up despite insurance. The community college dropout notice from 18 months ago, tuition unpaid, account suspended. His son had sacrificed his education to save his mother. Had worked himself to exhaustion trying to keep her alive. And when she died anyway, Ethan was left with nothing but debt and grief, and a broken locket with his father's name on it. Marcus found more photographs buried in Sarah's old blog. Birthday parties in small apartments. Christmas mornings with secondhand gifts. Sarah reading to a young Ethan, both of them curled on a worn couch. The images of a life built on love instead of money. A life Marcus could have been part of if he'd just stayed. There were letters too. Sarah had kept a journal, parts of it posted online before she got sick. Entries about raising a son alone. About explaining to a 5-year-old why his father never called. About Ethan asking if his daddy didn't love him. I told Ethan his father loved him very much, but had important work to do. The lie tastes like poison, but what else can I say? That Marcus chose an algorithm over his son? That he signed us away like a bad contract? Ethan deserves better than the truth. He deserves to believe his father is a good man who made a hard choice. Even if we both know that's a lie. Marcus read that entry 17 times. Each word was a blade, precise and clean, cutting deeper than the last. His son had grown up believing Marcus was a good man who'd made a hard choice. The truth was so much worse. Marcus found the debt next. Student loans Ethan had taken out to pay for his mother's treatment. Medical bills that had piled up despite insurance. The community college dropout notice from 18 months ago, tuition unpaid, account suspended. His son had sacrificed his education to save his mother. Had worked himself to exhaustion trying to keep her alive. And when she died anyway, Ethan was left with nothing but debt and grief, and a broken locket with his father's name on it. Marcus found more photographs buried in Sarah's old blog. Birthday parties in small apartments. Christmas mornings with secondhand gifts. Sarah reading to a young Ethan, both of them curled on a worn couch. The images of a life built on love instead of money. A life Marcus could have been part of if he'd just stayed. There were letters too. Sarah had kept a journal, parts of it posted online before she got sick. Entries about raising a son alone. About explaining to a 5-year-old why his father never called. About Ethan asking if his daddy didn't love him. I told Ethan his father loved him very much, but had important work to do. The lie tastes like poison, but what else can I say? That Marcus chose an algorithm over his son? That he signed us away like a bad contract? Ethan deserves better than the truth. He deserves to believe his father is a good man who made a hard choice. Even if we both know that's a lie. Marcus read that entry 17 times. Each word was a blade, precise and clean, cutting deeper than the last. His son had grown up believing Marcus was a good man who'd made a hard choice. The truth was so much worse. The waiting room was empty at 4 a.m. Just Marcus and plastic chairs and fluorescent lights that hummed like prayers. He sat down hard, his legs finally giving out, and put his face in his hands. 30%. 3 in 10. Odds that would be unacceptable in business, catastrophic in investment, meaningless in the face of losing the only thing that had ever actually mattered. Marcus hadn't prayed in 30 years. Hadn't believed in anything except spreadsheets and market analysis and the cold mathematics of success. But now he closed his eyes and reached for something he'd long ago decided didn't exist. Please. The word came out broken. Please don't take him. Not like this. Not before I can tell him I'm sorry. His voice cracked. Tears burned behind his eyes. Decades of suppressed grief finally breaking through walls he'd spent a lifetime building. I know I don't deserve this. I know I have no right to ask. But he does. He deserves a chance. He deserves better than a father who traded him for stock options and a goddamn penthouse. The sobs came then, wrenching through him like earthquakes. Marcus Hale, who'd faced down senators and CEOs and hostile takeovers without flinching, broke completely in a hospital waiting room at 4 a.m. Give me a chance to fix this. Please. Just one chance. I'll give everything back. All of it. The company, the money, all of it. Just let him live. Please let my son live. But God, if he was listening, didn't answer. The only sound was the hum of fluorescent lights and Marcus's ragged breathing and the distant beeping of machines fighting to keep his son alive. The surgery would take 8 hours. Marcus stayed on his knees for all of them. Ethan opened his eyes on the third day. Marcus was there, as he had been for 72 hours straight. Unshaven, rumpled, existing in a purgatory between hope and terror. He'd watched the monitors obsessively, tracking every heartbeat, every breath, like his vigilance alone could keep his son tethered to life. When those eyes finally opened, dark, confused, struggling to focus, Marcus felt his heart stop. Ethan. His voice broke on the name. You're awake. Thank God, you're awake. But Ethan's gaze slid past him, searching. Found Dr. Chun checking the monitors. His lips moved, forming words that came out hoarse, barely audible. Who is that? The question was directed at Patricia, not at Marcus. At the doctor. At anyone except the man who'd been sitting vigil for 3 days. Patricia glanced at Marcus, uncertainty flickering across her face. Marcus nodded slightly. Tell him. Ethan, this is Marcus Hale. He's been here since they brought you in. He authorized your surgery, covered all your medical care. Ethan's brow furrowed, trying to process information through the fog of medications and trauma. Why? The word was thick, confused. I don't know him. Each syllable was a knife. Marcus had known this moment was coming, had rehearsed 100 different ways to say it. But now, facing his son's bewildered stare, every practiced word evaporated. Ethan. He moved closer to the bed, his legs unsteady. I know this is going to be difficult to understand, but You should rest. Patricia interrupted gently, speaking to Ethan. You've been through major surgery. Your body needs. No. Marcus's voice was firm. He deserves to know. He deserves the truth. Ethan's eyes sharpened despite the pain medication, some instinct telling him this moment mattered. Truth about what? Marcus took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. My name is Marcus Hale, and I'm your father. The words landed like bombs. Ethan stared at him, expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, then something darker. His heart monitor started beeping faster. My father. The words came out strangled. My father is dead. My mother told me. She told you I was gone. And I was. For 23 years, I was. Marcus's hands were shaking. I left when you were 6 weeks old. Walked away. And I am so sorry. You're lying. But Ethan's voice wavered. His hand moved unconsciously to his neck, searching for something that wasn't there. The locket. Where's my mother's locket? I have it. I found it in your belongings. That's how I knew. How I realized. Realized what? Ethan's voice was rising, machines beeping in alarm. That you had a son? That you abandoned us? His face twisted with an emotion decades in the making. Where the hell have you been? The question echoed in the sterile room. Where the hell have you been? Building empires. Making billions. Sleeping alone in a penthouse while his son grew up without him. Living a life that meant nothing while the only person who should have mattered learned to exist without a father. I don't know, Marcus whispered. I don't know. Get out. Ethan's voice cracked. Tears were streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat of fever and trauma. Get the hell out of my room. Ethan, please. You saved my life. Ethan laughed, bitter and broken. 23 years too late. Where were you when Mom was dying? Where were you when I was burying her alone? Where were you for any of it? Marcus stood frozen, watching his son fall apart, knowing he'd caused every second of this pain. Get out. Patricia touched Marcus's arm gently. Marcus, you should go. He went. Because even now, even after everything, he was still walking away. Marcus didn't leave the hospital. He couldn't. Instead, he sat in the corridor outside Ethan's room like a ghost haunting his own failures. Hospital staff walked past, whispering, wondering why Marcus Hale, the Marcus Hale, was camped outside a patient's door like a common visitor. Dr. Chin brought him coffee on the second day. He's asking for his discharge papers. He can barely stand. I know. But he's 23 and legally competent. If he wants to leave. She trailed off, sympathy etched in her tired features. Marcus, maybe you should give him space. Time to process. I gave him 23 years of space. The words came out hollow. Time doesn't fix this. Nothing fixes this. But he knew she was right. Knew that sitting outside Ethan's room like a security guard wasn't helping. Wasn't proving anything except that Marcus Hale could be as stubborn in redemption as he'd been in ambition. On the third day, Ethan emerged. Pale, moving carefully, one hand braced against the wall. He froze when he saw Marcus rising from the chair. You're still here. I'll always be here. If you'll let me. Ethan's laugh was sharp, caustic. Now you want to be a father? After building your empire? After mom is gone? His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. I looked you up. $43 billion. Magazine covers. The man who rewired Silicon Valley. The titles came out like accusations. That's what she was worth to you. That's what I was worth. $43 billion and a penthouse. No. Marcus's voice cracked. You were worth everything. And I was too blind to see it. Blind. Ethan's anger flared hot. You had eyes, didn't you? You had a phone. You had 23 years to show up, and you chose not to. He pushed off the wall, swaying slightly. And now you think you can save my life, and everything's forgiven? That your money can buy you a son? I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to. To what? Ease your guilt? Feel better about yourself? Ethan's voice dropped to something raw, broken. I don't need your help. I don't need your money. I needed a father, and you weren't there. End of story. He moved toward the elevator, each step an obvious struggle. Marcus followed, hands clenched at his sides to keep from reaching out. Let me drive you home at least. You just had brain surgery. I'll take a bus. Ethan, please. The elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped inside, then turned, his hand holding the door. For a moment, their eyes met. Marcus saw everything in that gaze, grief, anger, and underneath it all, a desperate, childlike hope that maybe, somehow, this could be real. My mom loved you until the day she died, Ethan said quietly. She never told me the whole truth about why you left because she didn't want me to hate you. She protected you even when you didn't deserve it. His voice wavered. I spent my whole life defending a father I never knew, making excuses for why you never called, never visited, never cared. And now you're here, and I don't know what to do with that. The elevator alarm beeped, warning the door was held too long. I can't be your redemption project, Mr. Hale. I can't be the thing that makes you feel better about your choices. You're not a project. Marcus's voice broke completely. You're my son, and I know I don't deserve a second chance. I know I burned that bridge 23 years ago, but if you'll let me try, if you'll give me even the smallest opportunity to prove I'm not that man anymore. Prove it how? Ethan's eyes were bright with unshed tears. What could you possibly do that would make up for a lifetime? Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking hands, opened his email, typed quickly, then turned the screen toward Ethan. I'm stepping down as CEO of Titan Tech. Effective immediately. The company, my shares, everything. It's being placed in a trust. For you. Ethan stared at the screen, at the email drafted to the board of directors. You're insane. Probably. Marcus's smile was broken. But you said it yourself. I chose the company over you once. I won't make that mistake again. I don't want your company. I don't want any of it. I know. That's why I'm giving it to you. Marcus met his son's eyes. It took me 23 years to realize the empire meant nothing. Let me spend whatever time I have left proving that you mean everything. The elevator alarm screamed. Ethan stared at his father. This stranger who'd saved his life, who'd destroyed his childhood, who was now offering to destroy his own legacy for a chance at redemption. Don't send that email, Ethan said finally. Hope flared in Marcus's chest. Not yet. Ethan's hand released the door. You want to prove you've changed? Then show me. Not with money. Not with grand gestures. Show me with time. With presence. With all the things you should have given me 23 years ago. The doors started to close. And maybe, I'll believe you. The elevator descended. Marcus stood alone in the corridor, phone still clutched in his hand, that unsent email glowing on the screen. His son had given him a chance. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Just a chance. It was more than Marcus deserved. It was everything he needed.